The story of the elderly woman, how to be happy in every situation. In a small, peaceful village where trees sway in the morning breeze and every home carries the memories of generations of love and simplicity, lived an elderly woman who was different from everyone else. She wasn't rich and she didn't hold a prestigious position, but she carried a secret. The secret of constant happiness, no matter the circumstances. No one ever saw her sad. Her smile was like a warm light in a cold morning, and her eyes seemed to read what was in people's hearts. The villagers often came to her for everything in their joy, their sorrow, their confusion, and their need for understanding. She listened without interrupting, responded without judgment, and gave advice without condemnation. One morning, a young man sat before her, carrying a weight in his chest that no one could see. He asked her, "Why are you always happy? You don't seem to feel sorrow. Don't you go through tough times? Don't you get let down by life like we sometimes do?" She smiled, as she always did, that smile that never faded, and said, "My dear, sorrow doesn't spare anyone. But it only takes up residence in your heart if you give it the keys. Yes, I've been sad. I've tasted pain. In fact, I lost the dearest thing one can lose, but I chose not to live as a victim." The young man was shocked. He hadn't expected that answer. He thought this woman was simply fortunate, that happiness had chosen her and not anyone else. He asked, "But how? How can a person be happy despite everything?" She gazed far away, as though she were watching a film of her life, and said, "I'll tell you about me. I was married to a man I loved deeply. He was as simple as I was, and together we worked hard, planting and harvesting, raising our children with our own hands. We didn't have much, but we had everything: love, warmth, and hope. Then my husband became ill suddenly, and we didn't have enough to treat him. We tried as much as we could, but he passed away. He left, and all I was left with was an emptiness that couldn't be filled." She sighed, then continued, "I cried a lot. I didn't see any purpose in anything. Everything seemed dull. Then I looked at my children, into their small eyes searching for me. I was all they had left. I had to be their world. That was when I realized life wouldn't wait for me to heal, and if I allowed sorrow to break me, I would break them too. So I decided to search for happiness, not as something external, but as something internal. I decided to create it every day." She took a deep breath, as if inhaling a memory, and then said, "From that day, I started waking up and telling myself, today I will find at least one reason to smile." Sometimes the smile came from a flower blooming by my window, and sometimes it was because I heard a child laugh. They weren't grand things, but they were enough to make my heart beat with life. The young man sat quietly. He didn't know what to say, but something inside him had changed. He asked her, "And what about the tough days, when everything is bad?" She laughed and said, "Even the worst days pass. Maybe slowly, maybe with pain, but they pass. I learned to always tell myself, this too shall pass. Even sorrow has an expiration date, and I don't want to live my life waiting for better days. I want to create the best from what I have now. Sometimes happiness isn't in the circumstances, but in how we view them." Then she leaned towards him and said, "Do you know what the secret is?" He looked at her with curiosity in his eyes. She said, "The secret is to not wait for happiness, but to choose it, to make it from anything, from everything. To realize that every moment in life is a small opportunity to smile, to give thanks, to live deeply." And so the young man left her home with a new understanding in his heart. His circumstances hadn't changed. He hadn't gotten a new job, and his problems weren't solved overnight. But something was different. Something had shifted within him. He began waking up every morning looking for one reason to smile. And by evening, he would discover that he found more than one reason. Days passed, and the story of the elderly woman spread from one person to another. It wasn't just a story. It was an invitation to reflect, to return to oneself. People began asking themselves each morning, "What is the one thing I can be grateful for today?" And the village began to change, not because the circumstances had changed, but because their hearts had learned to see the light amidst the darkness. They realized, as the elderly woman had realized, that happiness isn't something we reach after achieving everything we want. It's something we practice every day, an internal decision, a skill we need to train our hearts to master. They learned to appreciate the small things, to be patient with what couldn't be changed, and to enjoy what they had now. And over time, the young man began noticing a shift in himself. At first it was hard, and his heart resisted the idea, especially during the moments when life seemed dark. But with each new day, he found himself returning to the elderly woman's lessons, asking himself, "What can I be grateful for today?" There were times when he felt that in the deepest moments of sorrow, the answer would come in the form of something small, maybe a kind word from a friend or a warm gesture from his family. Every moment carried a small lesson for him. During the times when life seemed unfair, he would remind himself, "This too shall pass." And in those moments, he would feel inner peace filling his heart, as if there were a quiet voice saying to him, "Be patient, relief will come." And over time, the young man began to notice an internal transformation. His life became quieter. He started enjoying the small details he had once ignored. The smell of coffee in the morning, a stranger's smile, a flower blooming in a small garden nearby. He realized that happiness isn't just about achieving big goals, but about appreciating the simple things that make life worth living. One day, the young man went to visit the elderly woman again, but this time his heart was full of gratitude. When he entered her house, he found her sitting in the same spot as always, listening to the wind rustling the trees. But he felt a change in the atmosphere. There was an aura of peace and serenity around her. He looked at her and said, "You were right. I never saw happiness except in good times, but now I can see it everywhere." She smiled and said, "You now see with new eyes. You've learned that life is filled with challenges, but you are capable of finding joy within difficulties. Happiness doesn't come when things are perfect. It comes when we accept everything as it is and know that light can emerge even in the darkest moments." The young man realized that happiness had always been there, it just needed to be discovered. Life isn't about fighting against circumstances, but about the journey of personal growth and learning. Even when faced with great challenges, he learned how to face them with an open mind and a heart full of hope. Every day became a new opportunity. He focused more on what he had rather than what he lacked. And every time he found something good in his day, no matter how small, he felt peace. He now understood that happiness is a choice, an inner decision. A person can decide to be happy, no matter what they are going through in life. And in those moments when life seemed unfair, he would remind himself, "This too shall pass." Over time, the village began to change as well. It became more united, more understanding. Everyone learned from the elderly woman that life isn't a battle against circumstances, but a journey of learning and personal growth. And even when they faced great challenges, they learned how to confront them with an open mind and a heart full of hope. The man now had a small family of his own, and though the circumstances of life continued to change, he held on to the lessons he had learned. Every day was an opportunity to choose happiness, and he had learned to live with a deep sense of peace, grateful for every moment of his journey.